Hi, my name is Theresa Reimann-Dubbers. I'm a researcher at Co-Matter, which is a research and strategy studio based in Berlin, and I'm going to share with you our most recent project on the inevitability of avatars and how avatars are tied up in the construction of identity. I'm also an artist, and the format of the presentation and the language and the visuals are closely tied to my artistic practice. What are avatars? Here is a little collection of avatars gathered on Google, and a few definitions also gathered on Google. So we have a range, but we have no single answer for what an avatar is and is not. In our research, we focus on the following understanding. An avatar is a customizable digital body through which a non-digital entity, like a physical person, can be present, interact, and hold space in the digital realm. This type of avatar we find in massively multiplayer online role-playing games, in first-person shooter games, in virtual worlds. We do not find them beyond the borders of their worlds. An avatar can't leave the world it's created in, because avatars are siloed in Web 2.0 confines, for now. In a future interoperable Web3 reality, this will change, and in that reality, avatars are inevitable. Inevitable because more and more of our daily realities continue to migrate to digital spaces, and we always follow. We shape-shift into the allotted slot provided for us. We slot ourselves into account architectures and become rectangular pieces of the Zoom puzzle. Digital-first realities are expanding, and the construction of digital-first identities is gaining momentum. There is also momentum in the money. Here are growth predictions of the avatar industry. A report by Brand Essence, a UK-based market research company, puts the 2021 3D avatar solutions market at $73.2 billion. It puts the compound annual growth rate at 33.2%. And the expected market size in 2028 at $544.6 billion. The same report lists a few key players in the market. Most are from Germany, Canada, and the US. And almost all the companies mentioned are in the business of translating physical human forms into avatars. How did we get here? To find the beginnings of avatars, we have to go to 400 BCE, to the earliest written instance of the ancient Sanskrit term avatara. Avatara is usually translated into English as descent or incarnation. But more specifically, avatara describes when the essence of a deity manifests on earth in an earthly form. Krishna, for example, is the 8th avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu. In its ancient verb form, avatarana, the term carries a second meaning, the first being the act of a deity descending into the earthly realm, and the second meaning is the act of freeing humans from their suffering at the hands of evil forces. So when we talk about avatars today, the word carries with it these two implications. There is a transfer of form to go from one realm to another, and there is a morally motivated act of freeing someone. Critically, the reason we now talk about avatars in secular settings is because the term was taken on a westward journey of cultural appropriation that began in the 18th century. Namlila Free-Jones, adjunct professor and PhD candidate in the Department of Religion at Rice University, traces that journey in her paper titled From Gods to Gamers. In the 18th century, as a result of colonialism, scholars in Britain, Germany, and the US began studying the Sanskrit language. Out of those studies came the first use of the term avatar in the English language to describe descents of the deity as preserver by British Orientalist Sir William Jones in 1784. Following this Western debut, Lord Byron, Balzac, and Browning included the appropriated reference in their writing, as did the late 19th century New England transcendentalists, Walt Whitman and Henry David Thoreau, the latter of which especially studied and used Hindu ideas as a resource to shape his perspective. 100 years later, avatars made their digital debut in the video games of the 1980s. But first, let's pause here and observe a pattern of religious concepts recoded, secularized and tied to technologies. Why? Religion is the original narrative of higher, infinite, and complex power. Technological environments conjure a sense of the other, of higher, infinite, and complex power beyond our grasp. So we default to describing technologies using a language we associate with the power, unknowability, and higher dimensions of another elsewhere beyond our grasp, the religious realm. So the term avatar has been secularized and recoded, from Sanskrit avatara, describing an earthly figure through which a deity descends into the earthly realm to restore morality, to avatar, describing a digital figure through which a human descends into the digital realm. The moral component is not compulsory, and humans have taken the place of deities. In the following case, however, the moral component is key. Ultima 4, The Quest of the Avatar, released in 1985. It's the first use of the term avatar in a digital context, and the fourth game in Richard Garriott's Ultima series. He wants it to be different from the previous games, where the majority of players were taking unsolicited shortcuts. They were murdering and stealing from peaceful citizens to get ahead in the game, bypassing intended routes where assets are honorably earned. Garriott didn't like what his worlds were becoming. He, as creator, felt responsible for the immoral and sinister turn. So in response, Ultima 4 would be a moral quest, where players are confronted with their own ethical judgment and bias, and the only way to win is by going through the game conscientiously, by doing right by others. To create the game, Garriott needed a moral framework, which came to him through the screen of his TV, after watching a program about Hinduism, specifically about avatars and their virtues. Garriott constructs a gameplay, a moral quest based on 8 virtues, with the avatar as protagonist, where you as player inhabit the avatar. I quote Garriott, "It was important to me that you weren't playing a character. You couldn't be playing Conan the Barbarian. It had to be you personally. Even though you, when you manifested in this world, might have gone from a skinny little computer nerd to a big, buff, heroic warrior, and maybe even changed genders. It was important that it feels like your soul, your spirit is inside your character, so that you feel responsible for the deeds and actions your character performs." There is an element of avatarana here. Through the avatar, the person can be freed from the limits of their body that may be the source of pain and suffering, or freed from a body that society shames. Habitat is another early example of digital avatars. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, released a year later in 1986, and it's the first large-scale commercial virtual community. Habitat was created by Randy Farmer, Janet Hunter, Eric Wilmunder, and Chip Morningstar. In it, each player is represented by an avatar with which they interact with others and the world. Habitat creators described avatars as animated figures, usually in humanoid form. Habitat's in-game world was governed by its avatar citizens. Very little restrictions were implemented by the game creators. The avatars of players could own guns and kill each other within the game. Controversial, of course. Reflecting in 1990, this is what the game creator said. "At the core of much of the debate is an unresolved philosophical question. Is an avatar an extension of a human being, thus entitled to be treated as you would treat a real person, or a Pac-Man-like critter destined to die 1,000 deaths, or something else entirely? Is habitat murder a crime? They wondered. In 1992, avatars appeared in the novel Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, which of course we all know because in it he coined the term metaverse. But the story is also an early vision of how inequalities might manifest in avatars. In Snow Crash, avatars are introduced like this. The people are pieces of software called avatars. They are audiovisual bodies that people use to communicate with each other in the metaverse. The novel's protagonist hero is a hacker and has access to expensive hardware. His avatar, I quote, is a slick custom avatar who's packing a couple of swords. Whereas the general population with no access to expensive hardware and who enter the metaverse via public terminals are assigned avatars that are, I quote, jerky, grainy, black and white. Socioeconomic realities bleed through into avatars. Let's take a little lesson in avatar anatomy. What is an avatar made up of? One layer is the technological affordances. 2 avatars, identical in physical characteristics, but one rendered 10 years ago and one rendered today will look different. The aesthetic difference is a result of technological advances that allow much higher fidelity textures, definition, and details to be rendered. A second layer is the affordances of the immediate environment. The range of options provided by the creators of the digital space with which a person can customize their avatar. The spectrum of what can be represented in a world is subject to the preferences, reflections, means, and intentions of the people creating the space and the society they are shaped by. The third layer is the individual, the capacity of expression afforded by the cultural and socioeconomic background of an individual, and the motivations, purposes, and desires that the human user brings to a character in a specific digital space. So avatar anatomy is a complex system where everything from the LED matrix that lights up the screen and the political orientation of the software creators to the fantasies of the person behind the screen forms part of the distributed organism. The layered avatar creature is different to a player character like Sonic or Mario. Player characters are in-game representations of a person, whereas an avatar is a fragment of a person's identity, an evolving fragment of an identity collage. What does that mean? The fragment of identity evolves according to its lived experiences, whichever world that may be in. Professor Sisse Seeger-Jensen analyzes the evolution of a second life avatar identity and its relation to the physical person in her paper Shadows Cast on the Screen. A man, a physical person called Thomas, is a programmer who leaves his job to full-time pursue his side business in Second Life, where his identity is his avatar called DC Aspen. DC Aspen is a property developer. He's successful. He quickly gains a good reputation and is a respected and engaged member of the community. But after a while, other members of the community point out to DC Aspen that he doesn't look the part. He needs to scrub up, to not only be a valued member of the community, but to appear as one too. The physical person Thomas has never been interested in clothing. His life in the physical world didn't require it. He would wear whatever. And with that same attitude, he just went with the default avatar when creating DC Aspen. But to other Second Life residents, he looked like an amateur, like someone who doesn't know or respect the culture and codes of the environment. So Thomas, via DC Aspen, had to learn and adapt to suit up DC Aspen and thus align with the codes and expectations of the environment in which DC Aspen resides. How a person presents themselves matters. It matters because other people infer or make judgments about that person based on how they present themselves. We know that from living in the world. It matters also because how a person presents themselves, what clothing they choose to put on, affects how they themselves behave. Enclothed cognition describes this phenomenon. The term was introduced by Hajo Adams and Adam Galinsky in a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. The same powerful feedback has been observed in virtual worlds. Here it's called the Proteus paradox. Nick Yee, Jeremy Bailenson, and Nicholas Duchenor showed that how we present ourselves in virtual worlds, so the appearance of our avatars, influences how we behave in that world. But the most significant bit of their findings was that the behavior change in a person in the virtual world brought on by the characteristics of their avatar continued even after the virtual session ended, after they left their avatar body. The behavior change carried over into the physical realm, into the person's physical body identity. Experience permeates the border between virtual and physical, because experience in both realms is lived and therefore real. Until now, we focused only on game worlds, because this is where avatars first entered the digital. Let's go to non-gaming digital spaces. For context, when Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar came out in 1985, the internet had just 2,000 hosts. It was unformatted. It was before the World Wide Web. And it was accessible only to experts in computing, who could use the internet to send messages, read news, and share files. Since then, as we know, there has been an exponential unfolding of digital spaces. First came bulletin boards, then the World Wide Web, and then the social networks and platforms built on top of it. We as humans interact, take part in, inhabit, are present in these myriad digital spaces. Our daily reality in 2023 takes place in an interwoven infrastructure of physical, digital, and hybrid space. How do we as humans, as physical beings, interact, take part in, inhabit, are present in digital places? How do we hold digital space? We hold space as usernames, user profiles, icons, and avatars. The ability to hold unique space is fundamental to taking part in a society. A unique position means we can be addressed. We can address others in their unique position. We can send and receive. We witness events unfolding from a unique perspective, and we can document these events from our position. Our position, how and where we show up in each digital space, is co-constructed by the affordances of a space and our own motivation that we bring to it. My LinkedIn profile is not the same as my Instagram profile. The framework for expression offered by each platform is different. The motivation and intention with which I curate my identity fragment within each platform is different. In Web 2.0, there is limited movement, crossing, and overlapping between these identities, unless platforms are owned by the same company, like Meta, or integration agreements exist between companies. But for now, there is no real interoperability, no real continuity between the digital identity fragments we've been constructing in lots of places all over the internet for about 2 decades. The only continuous basis that these fragments share is the physical identity of the person that all these accounts or identity fragments are created from. The platform era has encouraged us, socially and algorithmically, to tie our digital selves to our physical selves, to post pictures of our faces, our food, our travels, and our relationships on Instagram, to accurately mirror our education and employment history on LinkedIn, so our digital self is a carefully angled window to our physical self. But now we're shifting towards a tipping point over into a digital-first era, where a digital self doesn't need to document a physical one. Physicality is not a prerequisite for authenticity on a screen. There is authenticity in digital expression. People have known this from the start and expressed themselves intuitively in digital spaces, living out alter egos where usernames are aliases, cultivating close relationships that might never leave the digital realm. Cultivating close relationships in the digital realm is something that most of us, voluntarily or not, would have been confronted with during the lockdowns of the last years. With remote work and online everything, the shift towards digital first is accelerating. In 2021, the global digital transformation market size was at $1.51 trillion US. According to a report by Fortune Business Insights, it's expected to grow by 20.9% each year. So in 2029, the digital first market will be at $6.78 trillion US. Something I first saw a lot of back when the metaverse was interesting was digital first fashion and makeup. Things that are all tied up in cultivation of identity. An identity for which a physical body isn't needed. An identity for which the actions of our physical selves don't auto-generate the script. The components are all there within the digital to construct, cultivate, and express digital first identity with digital products immersed in digital culture. The digital world has an infinite quality to it. It's a world in flux, time spans untied to lifetimes, and the metabolic meter doesn't dictate the rhythm, so identities can shift and change arrhythmically. There are opportunities here for expanded self-expression. We can fly, we can shapeshift, we can escape bodily restrictions and the shame we might be made to experience in our physical bodies. There are opportunities here for living out identities that challenge traditional identity parameters. Opportunities for self-presentation that more closely reflect our multiplicities, that give form to the fluid and fragmented identities that more and more people are already living out. The shift in the nature of identity from the static personal narrative towards multiple selves with ever-evolving and often contradicting narratives has a broader and older context. A UK Government Office of Science report from 2013 with the title Future Identities, Changing Identities in the UK, the Next 10 Years, stated, "The internet has not produced a new kind of identity. Rather, it has been instrumental in raising awareness that identities are more multiple, culturally contingent, and contextual than had previously been understood." The report lists the main drivers of the shifts in the nature of identity. They include an aging population, young people, religion and secularization, diversity, hyperconnectivity, biomedical technologies, consumerism, economic downturn, the built environment, environmental risk, trust. So most things. Our fixed identity narrative has been coming unstuck for some time. Our collage of identity fragments has been reflected back at us via our screens for some time too. In an interview in 2012, Sherry Turkle talks about people taking on multiple online personas and playing with identity as multiplicity. I quote, "Cyberspace takes the fluidity of identity that is called for in everyday life and raises it to a higher power. People come to see themselves as being the sum of their distributed presence on all the windows they open on the screen." I talked to Xaver Schneider, who makes Memoji avatars on his mum's iPhone. He made a book from a selection he made over the last 2 years. Xaver was 7 years old when he made these. He says, creating avatars is intuitive. It's not quite playing, more similar to drawing. He starts with a parameter like skin color and hair, and then builds on top, editing and rearranging until he considers it finished. Xaver's intuitive drawings, or maybe collages, are a creative expression with Apple memojis as his medium. The many opportunities we have with digital-first identities come with many challenges. Characteristics like race and gender are tied to very specific lived experiences, but flat and smooth in a drop-down menu, gender and race are just visual features. We risk reducing lived identities to trends. Trends you can try on and take off as you please, where the lived experience is trivialized, an identity ripped from its context and styled into aesthetic social currency for anyone to appropriate and profit from. We have to talk about our physical bodies. Physical bodies are not compatible with digital-first identities, but our physical bodies, through whose mirror neurons we empathize with the bodies of others, through whose sensory system we feel ourselves and each other and the world, are not disposable. A body is all we have, a living, breathing, finite reminder of the responsibility we have to ourselves, to our human and non-human others, to our planet. I'm trying to understand where we are now, and I picture a collage, identity as a collage that contains all our multiplicities, contradictions, our distributed presences, our account identities, aliases, and alter egos, with our physical self as another ego that we alter between. With each fragment of the identity collage, we occupy a unique position from where we perceive and are perceived. Each body, digital or physical, calls forth its own set of experiences, its own way of knowing, shaped by its layers of materiality, culture, and the power structures it's plugged into. The collage contains who we are when we feel the consequence of a body, and also who we are when we're under the illusion that pixel bodies are not part of our matter. Pixel bodies are part of our matter. The pixel body is a fragment of ourselves. We are responsible for this bit of our identity. But at the same time, do we really govern it? Isn't a pixel always ultimately owned by someone else? Might a software update amputate a part of ourselves? Who profits from our digital existence? Might a company's terms and conditions be able to lay claim to the rights of your identity? I'll end there by asking that we consider not just these few, but the many complex and divergent questions, dilemmas, and ambiguities that avatars carry with them. Thank you.